everybody, my name is Carol Brown. I am an urban fantasy author and a writer for Otherworld Inc. and Through Faith Press. I also write under the pen name of Faye Black for Violet Gaze, and I'm here to talk to you about how to have a conversation. In your career as a writer and an author, and pretty much anything else that you decide to do in the future, you are going to encounter people who are going to have different opinions from you and are going to have thoughts and comments about your works, and sometimes this will come off in an accusatory tone. And I would actually like to provide you guys with a tool set to help combat this interesting situation. The main reason I bring this up is because in a lot of the panels and the workshops that I've gone to, I've had the ability to sit down and listen to how people communicate with each other, and occasionally somebody will give a response to a question where I'm like, oh no. For those of you who are wondering what my background in being able to talk about this topic is, before I became an author and working over at Otherworld Inc. in the HR capacity, I was actually a special education teacher focusing on working with individuals who were diagnosed with autism and teaching them social skills, and a lot of that involved anything between teaching them how to do empathetic listening to why we don't bite people we like. And in psychology, we do have a really big focus on how to talk to clients and individuals and working on making sure that they feel listened to and making sure that we are listening in turn. So I have real life experience and academic experience and all that wonderfulness, but anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about how to have a conversation. Now, when I was growing up and I encountered somebody who had a different opinion than me, I would listen to what they had to say and be like, okay, whatever. And if I thought they were a dumbass, I thought that they were a dumbass. And if they had something I thought was interesting, I would, carry that with me. Currently, there is I guess I'll call it an epidemic. Why not? I'll call it an epidemic, where people just do not have the ability to actually have a conversation with each other. And a lot of this actually stems either because it's an emotional argument, it's a conversation that attacks who their identity is, or it's just a difference of ideology. It's one of those things that people have a hard time trying to separate themselves from the topic at hand, and because of that, it turns into a huge emotional mess. In my personal opinion, I think that this was actually fostered by various school systems who were looking to create safe spaces for people to go to and not have their beliefs or their ideas questioned, and because of that, they weren't able to develop the coping skills to deal with somebody who has a different opinion than them. And again, that is my opinion as somebody who has taught and has gone to colleges and kind of seen how this works. And my opinion, if you have a different one, I would actually like to hear about why you think that it's kind of escalated to the way that it is right now. Just leave a comment down below. Love to hear your thoughts on that. Now, I'd like to go ahead and move into the very first step of how to have a conversation or a difficult conversation with somebody, and that is actually going to be detaching yourself from the conversation. This is the hardest step to do because, as I stated before, some of these conversations kind of border on attacking a person's identity, either intentionally or not intentionally. And so when some statements are said, people are immediately bristling at them because it's kind of attacking who they are as a person. For example, this morning, right before I recorded this video, my husband and I were coming back from the gym, and while we were driving, he made an offhand statement about how he thinks that psychology is worthless and how it's damaging the rest of society for a number of different reasons. And I remember sitting in the car thinking, he knows that my field of study is psychology and that I'm working towards becoming a psychologist, and he still said this. And so I detached myself from the conversation. It's like, that's a very interesting thing to say. Can you please define that a little bit more for me? Now, the main reason I'm suggesting that people detach themselves from the conversation, especially if it involves something that is their identity or their ideology, is because when you become emotionally compromised, you are going to struggle with having the conversation because you're going to get really worked up and you're going to get very emotional, and it's just going to be really hard to have a productive conversation on whatever topic it is that you're having. Now, in order to do this, you're going to have to do a little bit of an exercise where you kind of do some self-reflection, understand who you are, what your values are. You need to understand what makes you upset, and then things that you can do to kind of combat what it is that makes you upset. And when I say what makes you upset, a lot of things that actually will make a person angry all have a very common root. And breaking down all that into that one root is going to basically give you that self-awareness that when somebody says something, you'll be like, that makes me angry because it's tied to this and I know that. And then you can kind of take that breath moment before you can continue with whatever it is that you need to say. For example, my root thing that usually sets me off really bad is disrespect. And I don't mean disrespect towards me, I just mean disrespect in general. Earlier this week when I was at writing group, my special writer who's there made an offhanded comment that the Super Bowl halftime show wasn't going to be very interesting because it was Jada and Shakira. And when I asked him why he said that, he was just like, well, Shakira's not very important. And I just and he was like, well, you want to talk about it? I was like, no, I really don't want to talk about it with you. And the reason that I said I didn't want to talk about it with him is because this is an individual who kind of thrives on having arguments with people. So he occasionally likes to push my buttons to piss me off. He manages, but I don't engage because that's what he wants. Now, the next step of what you need to do at this point is that you need to actually listen. And I know some of you are kind of like, but I do listen. And I'm like, no, you actually need to listen. What 70% of people do in a conversation is they're not actually listening to each other. They're waiting for their turn to talk. They're planning what they're going to say in response to an earlier comment without listening to everything else that's being said. If you're not used to actually doing the active listening and kind of really reflecting on what a person is going to say, this does take a little bit of practice if you're not in the habit of doing it. And you have to show that you're listening as well. And this can take form in a couple different ways. If you guys ever talk to me and we're having a very long conversation, you will occasionally see me nod, to show that I am actively listening. Or some people like to do the thing, which is really distracting. I hate that. But that's how they show that they're listening. But the other thing that you can do to show not only that you listen, but you're comprehending what the person is saying, is that you can kind of summarize what it is that they are saying. Now, I don't recommend that all the time because it gets really annoying really fast, but you need to do it on occasion when you are trying to show the person that you do understand, because if the person that you are talking to is under the impression that you're just not comprehending their point, they are going to repeat themselves over and over and over until they think that you've got it. So when you summarize what they're trying to tell you, that shows that they're listening. And I would avoid the whole I get your point comment, because while you are, when using that comment, trying to say that, hey, I understand what you're saying, often this is taken not very well, because it's almost like saying, shut up, I understand what you're saying, but you're not actually showing that you understand what they're saying. So again, I'm kind of going back to the summarize thing, where you kind of summarize what it is that they're saying to show that you do, and then once you do that, then people typically stop repeating themselves unless they've got something else going on. Empathetic listening is another skill that kind of takes a little bit of practice to do, and this involves, while you're listening to the person, trying to understand how they feel, and a lot of times body language will give this away right away. But when you're doing this, you're like, okay, this person's really passionate about this, or they're very frustrated about this topic, or they're really upset, or anything else like that. I'm trying to think of a good example that I can use for this. Okay, so when I was teaching, I had a student who was really frustrated with math, and they were trying to tell me that they were frustrated with math, and they had autism, so it was a lot of loop conversations, and it was me trying to break them out of the loop thinking. And at one point I sat down, I was like, I really do understand that you were very frustrated about having to do this homework assignment because you don't understand the material. I would actually like to go ahead and talk about ways that we can move forward and help you understand it. And if you are a teacher, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work, because about 7 times out of 10 they'll be like, well, I just need to understand how to do this problem. And the other times it's like, well, I just don't get it. I don't get it. It really depends on the spectrum that they're on. But anyway, that's not here or there for this conversation. But I'm circling this back to the empathetic listening real quick. It's really, 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 really important that you do focus on the empathetic listening of a conversation if somebody is getting upset, because a lot of times the emotional memory that a person has is actually a lot stronger than the intellectual memory. They're going to always remember how you make them feel, but not what you said. So the feelings and understanding the feelings and showing that you understand is going to go a lot farther than understanding what their intellectual ideas are. Now, number 3 on this list is actually finding common ground, which I very rarely see anybody do. I think the only people I see that work on trying to find common ground in an argument or a discussion are doctors and psychologists. And the reason that they do that is because it's finding a common ground is actually going to give you the leeway that you need into getting somebody to kind of understand what it is that you are trying to say. So I'm going to use an example from a doctor. And let's say that this is a doctor who wants to give shots to a child so that way they don't get measles, right? And the parent is an anti-vaxxer. They're kind of like, I don't believe in vaccinations. My kid can make up the decision when they're older, or whatever that reason is. And the doctor's like, okay, I respect your decision. I'm just kind of wondering, do you think that measles are bad? And they're like, yeah, well, of course I think measles is bad. Do you think that this is bad? And they're like, yeah. And they're basically going through the list of things that are bad. And it's like, okay, so you and I think that these things are bad, which could be, very detrimental for a child to have. That works in a sense because then the doctor's able to give one of the shots out of 5, where some doctors are like, well, get out of my clinic, right? We're working with the life of a small child here. Let's focus on the life of a small child. And in my personal experience, a lot of conversations out here do have a middle ground or a common ground that these two people are talking from, but the big difference is about how to approach that common ground. And that's where I hear a lot of friction between groups, including groups that are part of the same circles, because let's take Twitter Mob. I always talk about Twitter Mob at some point. Twitter Mob wants to have inclusion and more representation and a number of other things, and I think that we can all agree that needs to happen in a multiple of facets. And the problem that Twitter Mob has with a lot of other people is that while they do want this thing, their way of getting it is honestly by bullying people online, which I'm not really a big fan of. However, the one thing that I will concede on that is that Twitter Mob is able to get results a lot faster than somebody in the background, which, you know, kind of pains me to say that, but when you have like the voice of 1,000 people screaming at you, you may listen to them versus the one who's like, I told you this was going to happen, I really wish you would have listened to me. Now, the fourth thing when it comes to having a conversation with somebody that you are probably not agreeing with at this point is going to be your delivery. I have sat on so many conversations and debates and a number of other things, and the delivery makes such a huge difference. I mean, night and day, it's huge. So, like, again, more examples for you. At my writing group that I go to, we have an individual who is really big on having gestures and expressions in place of speech tags in the dialogue and stuff that's going on. And he was getting really frustrated because at one point, a couple weeks ago, he was just like, how come every time I say this, you guys tell me to shut up, but somebody else says it, you know, it's okay. And I said, it's your delivery. It's how you're saying it. You're being very accusatory. You're getting in this person's face, telling them what to do. And then I modeled him another way to actually talk about dialogue and how to flesh it out. And I was like, this is going to be received a lot better than you saying, you use too many speech tags, stop doing that, use gestures and expressions instead. That really doesn't go over very well, especially when you're talking about writers, because they just don't like having that finger in their face. And this is where you can kind of work the summary of listening to what somebody else has to say. Writing Wife did this absolutely flawlessly a couple months ago, where she had a person that was coming in and basically doing a critique on her writing style. And the two have very different writing styles. And the person was like, you know, I think that you should change this and you should do that, and da-da-da-da-da, huge list of things. And Writing Wife kind of looked at it and she was just like, you know, I understand what you're saying in regards to kind of changing the pacing and the way that the descriptions are done, but at this point I'm seeing that this is a semantics between your writing style versus mine, and while I do appreciate your feedback, I'm going to stick with my writing style. And I was like, oh, which that's the right way to do it. So again, just be kind of aware of the verbiage that you're using, the way that you're presenting your point, and try to not get worked up or emotional about it, because again, as I stated earlier in the video, the moment that you get worked up is the moment that you're going to struggle having this conversation moving forward. Now, the fifth step, which some people would argue should be the first step, but it's the fifth, because if you can't do the other four, then this one doesn't matter. The fifth step actually has to do with knowing what you're talking about, and I find that this is a huge issue between a lot of groups of people, because they will have an idea about how something is and they're going to go with that and think it's true until they are able to be convinced or shown otherwise. So the example that I would actually like to provide for this one is going to be firearms. I am not a big fan of firearms, but I have a number of them just because I don't live in a very good part of town. And my husband and I, we had a very long conversation about making this step, and then when we decided to do it, we're like, well, we're not just going to go and buy a firearm. We're going to go take the classes. We're going to go research the law. We're going to do a whole bunch of things because we didn't want to walk into this very dangerous legal thing without, you know, knowing what we're talking about. And, you know, we did this and we got the training and we went to the steps. We talked to lawyers. We did all of that. And I found it was really interesting because a lot of people have a huge misconception about firearms, and especially about .22 bullets. Just for your background knowledge, if you are not very savvy when it comes to firearms, .22 bullets are really tiny bullets. They're called baby bullets, and, you know, some gun enthusiasts, you know, scoff at them because they're like, oh, that's just gonna like tick them off or whatever. And because a lot of people voice that mentality, what ends up happening is that the general public has a misconception that these little tiny .22 bullets are not actually dangerous, when in fact they are responsible for about 80% of deaths when it comes to firearms. And when I used to be a teacher, I was sitting in the teacher's lounge and I was listening to somebody and they were like, well, I think I'm just going to get a .22 bullet because at least it's not going to hurt that person that much. And I was like, okay, you know, let's talk about this. Do you think that that's still a bullet? And she was like, well, yeah, I guess, yeah, it is a bullet. And I was like, do bullets kill people? And she's like, yeah, it's like the .22 bullet is still going to kill somebody. As long as you know that, then... Now, I'm not saying that you have to go and do oodles and oodles of research on your topic. However, being informed and having like current studies to back up your facts is going to be really important. And since we are talking about that, I do want to talk about kind of where you should get your information from on that front. I don't really recommend news outlets unless you're willing to go to 10 different sources on the same topic in order to find where the actual story in the middle of all of that is. And the reason for that is because it's just a fact. News outlets are biased, and they are going to present the story in the way that they think that it should be presented. And a lot of places will sometimes exaggerate information, or they will omit some information. Like I as a person who needs to know things, just doesn't trust one source on that. An example when I'm talking about how you can't always trust the news is a couple years ago, some of you may remember that we had a bird flu epidemic where everybody was worried about getting the bird flu. And anytime somebody happened to die from the bird flu, they're like, bird flu, takes a life. And it was getting to the point where people were afraid to leave their house because the news was just working this up into like a frenzy. People weren't going to work. Things were getting falling behind. Like, it was bad. And this was during the recession. We needed people to go to work, okay? And suddenly, one day, the entire story disappeared off the face of the earth. Nobody heard about this ever again. Nobody heard about the deaths. They didn't hear about bird flu, nothing. And the reason for that is because the government came in and said, shut up. Now, this bias also extends to scientific research as well. A lot of people don't like to admit that, but it's true. Every time I have to go and look up a research article, I look up the people, where they work, what their background is. I take a look at the sample size for the data. I look how many times they trialed it, and I also look who funded the research. For those of you who were growing up at the same time I was, you may remember that the food pyramid used to request that you had to have 10 servings of bread a day. 10. And this little food pyramid thing would often say studies show that you need to make sure that you have 10 servings of bread a day in order to have, optimum health and all this other stuff. And what a lot of people didn't realize right away is that this scientific research was actually funded by Nestle, one of the big bread companies. If you take a look at the way that the food pyramid is shaped now, it's very different. We don't have 10 servings of bread a day. But yeah, always make sure that you're looking at who's funding the research and see how that might be influencing the findings. Now, there's only one step left, and this is the step that will probably have some of you narrowing your eyes at me. But the sixth and final step of having a conversation with somebody is to not shut them down. This hurts my soul every time I see it, because regardless of where the motivation for this you don't get to have a say in this comment comes from, it's honestly a very bigoted activity, because what you're really doing is you are demonstrating that not only are you not willing to hear what this person has to say or reciprocate what they're saying, you're also disengaging yourself from the conversation to a point where you're not willing to extend yourself forward to clear up any misconceptions that these people may have, because frequently these people who may be saying something that you don't agree with just don't understand, and by you saying you don't get to have a say in this, be quiet, first off, you're going to put them on the defensive. They're not going to see you in a positive light. You won't find that common ground I talked about, and on top of that, you won't be able to have the ability to present information that they may not have access to readily. I have very interesting conversations with individuals because I am a heathen out in the middle of Mormon country, and so people think that I am either sacrificing goats in my living room or that I am running naked around in the backyard. At one point, I had an individual that tried to educate me about the history of my people, and I remember sitting there looking at this person going, I can't believe you actually have the audacity to talk to me about this. And at one point, they made a comment, it's like, and your people are supposed to be vegetarian, I see that you're eating meat. And I was like, well, okay, let's back up and let's go back to historical days of the ancient Druids of Ireland. And let me tell you something, they would throw people in the bog if they looked at their pig the wrong way. So if they're going to throw people in the bog, I think they're probably going to eat the pig too. Now, if I had taken the stance of saying, well, like, you're not pagan, Wiccan, or whatever heathen term that people are using right now, you don't really get to talk to me about my religion. What I'm really doing is I am very badly representing my entire branch. That's exactly what I'm doing, because I'm showing that I am irrational, that I'm not willing to have conversations, and that I'm not receptive to other people's points of view. And I'm going to be frank, everybody in this particular branch already is going through a tough time because of the various types of leadership that we have, and trying to represent us in a rational, calm light is a little difficult sometimes. So frequently what I try to do is I just try to clear up the misconceptions that people have. They have one thought and I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't actually work that way, and then they'll express something else, and it really just turns into a conversation where I'm clearing up misconceptions, which kind of is something that really needs to happen with a lot of people in general, because there are so many misconceptions about various topics, and it's just, ugh. But if you just do those 6 simple steps, you are on your way to having great conversations. It is a lot of work, and it can be overwhelming when you're first trying to figure out how to do this, but I swear it's going to help you out so much in your career if you are able to practice doing those things, and it's going to build up good relations between you and other individuals. You'll be able to be heard better, and a number of other things. And it's always good practice to start doing that now versus kind of figuring it out on the fly. Now, earlier in the video, you did hear me say that I asked a question in regards to why do you think it's hard for people to have conversations right now. I still would actually like to hear what you have to say about that. Again, comments are down below. Feel free to just share your thoughts and opinions on that. Would love to hear what you have to say. If you're new here, hi, welcome. It's nice to have you. If you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I always appreciate you taking the time to come and see what I have to say in regards to various topics. If you haven't already, there's a like button. Feel free to hit that. If you who are not subscribed, you can be subscribed. I post videos every Friday in regards to topics that have to do with the life of a writer, some writing advice, and obviously videos like this. Normally at this point, this is when I would plug my book and my newsletter and all that stuff. I don't really feel like that's appropriate for this type of video, but if you want to check it out, the links are down there below. But I'm going to go ahead and end off the video. It was really good talking to you guys today. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the question that I proposed to you, and I'm going to talk to y'all again real soon.